Well, this year we mark a centenary since the birth of South Africa's first democratic leader.
Now, the theme is renewing the Mandela legacy and promoting active citizenship in a changing world.
Now, our U.S. correspondent Simon Marks is getting ready to attend the Obama lecture. But first, he's joining us here this morning on the couch. Morning, Simon.
Morning, Simon.
On your couch. Well, thank you very much.
Very few people make it here. Yes.
When we look back at the 15 annual lectures for Nelson Mandela that the Nelson Mandela Foundation has been doing, for us it doesn't get bigger than Barack Obama. This is like the biggest hit of all.
Yeah, no question about that. And look, I mean, I think what's so fascinating about what we're going to witness over the next few hours is that South Africa will get to hear from Barack Obama, of course, but so will the United States. We have heard very little from Barack Obama since he left the White House and Donald Trump became president of the United States. And that's because Barack Obama has accepted the proposition that has always been honored by past presidents, that the United States has one president at a time. And if you're a former president, you don't really speak out very much and interfere very much, even when the activities of your successor irritate you, outrage you, enrage you, as surely Donald Trump's activities have done to President Obama. So look, I mean, I think there's going to be tremendous interest from the United States in listening to what President Obama has to say about Nelson Mandela's legacy, about reviving civic activism and leadership and honoring that legacy. But I think Americans will be listening to hear whether anything Barack Obama has to say today is any kind of message that he's aiming back at home.
And that's also very interesting because we know about what Donald Trump, we know his feelings about Africa. South Africa, not even a blip on his radar at the moment, Simon. But also you mentioned the legacy, and it comes at a time, he's here at a time where we're actually questioning Madiba's legacy. You've seen some of those stories this morning. Does the Rainbow Nation actually really exist? Have we been left to that? Barack Obama coming under similar criticism since leaving as well. What legacy has he left as well? So it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say and how he ties them together.
Well, and that applies in a couple of different ways, right? I mean, first of all, there's the question about Barack Obama's presidential legacy in the United States, something that Donald Trump has been trying to demolish from the very moment he arrived in the White House, pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Accords, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, trying to undo Obamacare, literally trying to knock down every skittle of Barack Obama's legacy, not always successfully. But then there's the question of Barack Obama's presidential legacy in Africa. And as you know, there are activists here who were saying that the invitation to make the Mandela Memorial Lecture should be rescinded because Barack Obama's commitment to Africa, his legacy in Africa, was lacking. And many historians back in the United States and analysts say if you actually look at their respective records, his predecessor in the White House, President George W. Bush, did more to advance U.S. policy towards Africa than Barack Obama did when he was president. So there's an opportunity here for Barack Obama to hit what Hillary Clinton might have referred to as the reset button. Remember, she went to Russia with that big red reset button. And that may be part and parcel of what Barack Obama is trying to do here over the next few hours. But, you know, he brings such authority to any stage that he walks onto, and his authority in many ways is only burnished by the contrast between him, Barack Obama, and the man who now sits in the office that he once occupied.
Yeah, he's coming here via Kenya. He went to Kenya to visit the distant relatives there and speak to some people. One will hear, maybe he might throw a line or two about that journey for him. But I can't help think about when he came here for the funeral of Tata Madiba in 2013 at the FNB Stadium, the big stadium, and the standing ovation and the round of applause he got. And it was at the same service where he spoke that he shook the hand at the time of Raul Castro of Cuba.
Hugely controversially, of course, back in the United States, because Republicans argued that you shouldn't talk to Raul Castro, you mustn't have anything to do with him, and that led, of course, then to sort of détente and a warming of the relationship with Cuba, something else that President Donald Trump has reversed. So that relationship has headed back, not quite to the deep freeze, but it's certainly back in the refrigerator compared to the way it was under President Barack Obama. But again, there's a contradiction there, because Donald Trump says, I'll talk to anyone. I'll go and talk to Kim Jong-un in Singapore. I'll go and talk to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, as he did yesterday. But when it was Barack Obama in the White House, talking to Raul Castro, visiting Cuba, of course, talking about talking to the Iranians and the North Koreans. He was excoriated by Republicans for even dreaming that you could engage in that kind of a dialogue.
Yeah, we'll explore that meeting in Helsinki shortly. We're going to be crossing as well live to Jessica King now in Moscow just to get the outcomes of that. But for us as South Africans, just to wrap up on this Mandela lecture with Obama, we can't ignore the fact that some people feel it's a special moment that Barack Obama has come here.
Absolutely.
And people will be coming from other countries besides the media like us will be covering it. And there'll be some kind of meaning that will have to be taken out of it at this time in our country where we're also grappling with issues of non-racialism and racism.
And that's why I think, you know, from a South African perspective, I don't want to put words into the mouths of South Africans, but I think that's why it will be so important to listen to what Barack Obama has to say here. There's a connective tissue historically. He met President Nelson Mandela. There will be people in the audience who are younger and don't have that kind of visceral memory of what was taking place here just a few short years ago, but they're of a younger generation. And so for Barack Obama and some of the other former heads of state who are going to be present for this memorial lecture, this is going to be quite a moment, and it's something that South Africans will be able to look at Barack Obama on television today. They'll be able to read his speech after it's all over, take things away from that speech, but be mindful of the fact that this is not just a big moment for South Africa, it is a big moment for the United States because it's a chance to hear him speak, and we very, very rarely hear from him these days.
And of course, there's going to be, Simon, lots of comparison when we hear from Barack Obama, sort of comparing to what we heard from Donald Trump yesterday. And let's talk about that for a moment. Let's talk about that meeting with Vladimir Putin. You spoke about how he's unashamedly and doesn't have to apologize to anybody to go and talk to whoever he wants to talk to. What did you make of that meeting? Because some people are saying, can you believe that this is what came out of Donald Trump's mouth again?
This is what happens, and it's happened twice now in recent weeks, when if you're President of the United States, you overrule your advisors and you insist on holding a summit meeting. He did it in Singapore with Kim Jong-un. Precious little planning, his advisors telling him not to do it until the groundwork had been better laid for a summit meeting. He did it again in Helsinki yesterday, and shockingly to many Americans, not just his detractors, shockingly to many Republicans, he openly sided with President Vladimir Putin on the issue of whether Russian intelligence agents and others were trying to swing the outcome of the US presidential election in 2016. Sided with the Russian president over the opinion of all America's intelligence agencies and the vast majority of Democrats and some Republicans who absolutely suspect, know from the indictments that have been handed down, that the Russians were up to something.
But there's, I mean, one of the statements he made, for me, there's a bit of a contradiction here. He says, he's quoted as saying, I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but then he goes and does that.
I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but Vladimir Putin says he didn't do it, and I believe Vladimir Putin. That is an astonishing moment in the history of the American presidency. He is being absolutely excoriated for what he did in Helsinki yesterday, back in Washington, D.C. by the foreign policy elites, and in many ways, it feels like a turning point for his presidency.